Thank you. I'd like to call upon each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then maybe you have a few thoughts about the broad specter of the of our topics, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty.
Hello, I'm delighted to be here. My name is Craig McLellan. I'm the CEO and founder of ThinkOn. We've been delivering sovereign cloud services to the federal government and several provincial governments since, well, 7 years, whatever the math is on 7 years. I have opinions. Some will come out today, some won't. But I can tell you that, I agree a bit with what Mark said earlier about some of the U.S. regulations and laws are being overplayed. But at the end of the day, we have an obligation to develop the Canadian economy and support Canadian businesses and Canadian citizens, and we have to think through that lens, I believe, every day when we make decisions. And I'll just make one other quick editorial comment that there was a question about a bubble earlier on. I'll share a little anecdotal story just for a second. As you can imagine, as a cloud service provider with operations in Australia, the US, Canada, the Caribbean, and the UK, a lot of people know who I am. I've had 3 neo cloud infrastructures shopped to me in the last 2 weeks that are about to fail financially. So if there's a little anecdotal evidence of what's going on out there with respect to a bubble, there is some real world evidence starting to appear.
Hi, I'm Vince Silvestri, Vice President Software at Evertz, the sponsor of this event. We're actually the country's largest OEM manufacturer that nobody knows about. We come from the broadcast space. We are the majority of the employees and all the manufacturing happens here in Canada, actually in Burlington and just outside of Toronto as well. And I've been with the company for 25 years, and I've seen it grow from 75 to the 2,400 we are today. And I think I was the 3rd software guy there. So I've been basically a code nerd for a long time, graduated McMaster from computer science, and I've been dabbling and playing with AI. In fact, you mentioned Geoffrey Hinton. I got to see his papers long before he was who Geoffrey Hinton is today. And so I've been playing with this stuff for a long time and very proudly Canadian. So as a company and as an individual, so this is a very meaningful panel to me and to our company.
Great, thanks. My name is Erin Kelly, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Advanced Symbolics. Our AI is Polly. She's an AI for market research. We've been in business for 9 years, so again, I guess that's something we all have in common. We didn't just jump on the AI bandwagon when ChatGPT came out. Our company has nothing to do with that. We're not a generative AI, we're a cognitive AI. We're based in Canada, do all of our R&D in Canada, almost all of our employees. We have employees here and in the United States, across Canada, in the US. I do business in 22 different countries. So while I'm a Canadian company, I also consider myself to be a global company. And that's the challenge for me that we're going to talk about today, I hope. And I also want to say something that came up on the last panel is DEI, diversity, who should be at the table? Business should be at the table. And I find too often we don't have business at the table when we're looking at policy and legal and academic and all of that. Business people have to be at the table as well. And hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that too, because that's what this is about. It's about the economy, I think, at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. Which procurement levers, mandatory controls, valuation credits for sovereignty, that sort of thing, would best enable trusted adoption of AI?
Let me take a stab at that. Well, first of all, I'll say that a procurement dollar is worth 3 times a grant dollar to business people, at least 3 times, because we can turn that into a multiplier effect, both from an investment perspective, but also from the way we actually attract other investors to us. So there's that lever of procurement versus grant dollars. The second thing I'll tell you is there's an opportunity to change, or let's say pivot, the way procurement's handled. And I realize most people have a bad opinion of procurement. I'm going to state it a little differently. Canadian suppliers want to solve problems. Foreign suppliers want to sell you stuff. And fundamentally, that is one of the cruxes of differentiation when you deal with domestically led organizations. You've got 3 senior people from 3 different companies here on the stage, all domiciled in Canada. And we're here to help solve problems. And procurement can change the rules just by saying, here's the problems I need to solve, as opposed to, lots of talk quietly amongst international suppliers, and they come up with a Byzantine list of requirements that no one really understands because no one understands the fundamental problem. I'll leave it at that. I'm sure you both have strong opinions.
Oh, I'll double down on that. There was actually a theme, right? What's the problem? The definition of the problem. We're talking about sovereignty and all, but I couldn't agree more. In procurement, a lot of times there's a half, here's some of the attributes, but give us the problem. I mean, as a company, I said we're the largest OEM nobody knows anything about is because we're a company built and run by engineers. And all we want to do is actually solve real problems in really sometimes cool ways. And that's exactly right. I think you just want clarity of what the actual problem is we're solving. And I say this to my team all the time. What's this for and who's this for? And if we can get really clear on that, then we stand a chance. Because we've got a lot of bright minds in this country. And if procurement can be very, very, very clear, this is a problem I have with even our customers. Once they are clear, usually we can knock it out of the park.
Double down. I mean, so many times I've gone with my company. We have sold to the government. We do big important work with the government. Foodborne illness in Canada. We had a salmonella outbreak in Canada 18 months ago. It was cantaloupe salmonella. That was our AI that discovered it was salmonella and that it was the cantaloupes and got the cantaloupes off the shelves. 7 people died in that outbreak. It would have been north of 60 without this early warning system. So successful that the CDC in the US adopted it and said we're 6 weeks ahead of anything they have in the United States at doing those types of things. So very, very important work, very groundbreaking work, and we're well recognized in the government. It still takes forever for us to get things procured, even with big fans. And so I'm on the ethical AI list. You can procure up to $9 million with my company. You think I can get anything through that list? No, right? So then I was told, well, get on with, go get a partner like Microsoft or, okay, fine, did that. Of course, now they're being shut down because they're not sovereign AI. You know what? Just tell us what we need to do. Be clear. You need to sign these T's and C's, or you need to do this. It's not clear. Get on this list. Oh, no, that's not good enough. Okay, well, just tell us what we need to do. I mean, that's really business is very, we're very, just tell us what it is, and we'll do it. But the government is not clear about what you need to do to follow the procurement rules there. So we just basically wait for the government to come to us if they have an issue. We don't do any RFPs or anything like that.
Now, which workloads or data sets should be the first movers for sovereign trusted AI, and which should wait?
Keep going the same order. Let's go reverse.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so this kind of came up in the last panel, and I think it was Esma. Well, everybody commented on it. I think we have to understand not everything needs to be private. Okay, I mean, if I'm an influencer and I'm putting my stuff out on TikTok, I don't want that to be private. Right? I want everybody to see it. I don't want the government to say, well, we don't want that to be on a U.S. server. No, I want everybody to see it. There's really very little data that I'm hyper concerned about. Everybody always talks about marketing data. Let me just say a little bit of a thing about PII and marketing data. The last thing you want is PII and marketing data. I'll give you a little example as to why. I was presenting at a conference not too long ago, and there were going to be 40 executives in the room. It was for this company. And I said to the organizer, okay, so there'll be 32 people there. She was very offended. No, I said there are going to be 40. If we say we're going to have 40 people there, there'll be 40 people there. Okay, when I got into the room, there were 33 people, okay? I can tell you with high certainty that 20% are not going to come. It's February, there's a snowstorm, my kid's sick, what have you, okay? There's always 20% who don't come. I can't tell you what 20% it'll be, or it'll cost me too much money to calculate that. So when it comes to marketing, you're much better off with that aggregated data. If I try to stalk Vince, okay, oh, Vince likes to drink Malbec wine, okay, now Vince is dating somebody else, and that person doesn't drink Malbec, so now he's on to something else, okay? So at a micro level, at that level, it's very expensive for me to stock Vince, and it's not worth it. Sorry, it's just not. But what I want to do is say people like Vince, okay? And I want to get that demographic info. That's why we do market research at that level, not because we can't do it at the PII levels, because it's not worth it. There's too much randomness, there's too much chaos. So PII is not valuable. Where PII is valuable is in like crime. I want to find out if Vince is, laundering money. It's not about people like Vince, it's Vince, right? And we've had issues like this where the police have gone to Rogers and got cell phone data without warrants. That's a problem, but that's been going on for decades. But that's where you have the PII, and I think that's where we need to have those conversations. But we've been needing to have those conversations for a long time and not really been having them, and now it's kind of surfacing with AI, but it's been a problem that we've always had. Your cell phone data is much more valuable than your Twitter data. Okay, let me just put it that way.
Yeah, I think, I'm probably not actually, have the right expertise to comment on specifically which data sets, but I think obviously anything that deals with our health, privacy, and safety, those things should be near the top of the list. But I think this is where we do need these task force and governments and other agencies to tell us, like, okay, what are the problems that are worth tackling? Start prioritizing the data sets and workloads that are sensitive, and then let industry at it. Like we supply network switches. People thought we were crazy to build a network switch. We did it for media-specific things, but they're high-volume data workloads. And like, why would you do that? Well, it was worth it to our customers to not go to Arista or Cisco, nothing against their products, but we could build something that was specific to them. So that was a priority of data sets and workloads that we needed to act upon. And so it's hard for us in industry to know all the ones. Everyone's gonna have motivations and self-incentivize for certain things, but we do need all the various people at the table, what we heard in the last panel, to start saying, hey, these are the ones that can be used or misused by bad actors, wherever they are. And these are the ones that need to be protected and sovereign. So I think that's a hard thing for industry to decide. But I think anything that can obviously harm us as a country or as individuals obviously is high on the list. But again, I don't think I can definitively answer that, Paul.
Maybe what I could add is one observation. The Privacy Act hasn't been updated since email was invented. Just a little anecdotal piece of evidence about maybe an area where we should be spending some quality time. So one of the things that Canada, I think, constantly brings to the table is this level of trust that lots of jurisdictions have either failed on or are in the process of failing on. I appreciate the comments Mark made earlier about copyright reform. If you're a publisher, I actually think you might be happy about copyright laws the way they are. Because why should you feed into a public model that trains for economic benefit that you don't derive any value from yourself? Just a comment on that. In the context of data in general, though, the federal government could actually do us all a great service if we establish one consistent data classification process for all levels of the public sector. So data that's considered protected, be at the federal level, is often considered completely open source, public domain at the provincial level, and frankly, who knows what happens at the municipal level. And these sorts of classification standards can really set us apart if we're going to attract global workloads for private model processing. Forget training, think about private inferences, probably the single biggest opportunity. But the real issue we have right now is a very outdated Privacy Act and a completely missing classification process across all levels of the public sector. That's where I would start. And then I would kind of wrap up by saying we have to remind the world that we are the trustworthy people, and we will attract workload to this market as opposed to exporting good jobs somewhere else because we have cheap power. We need to think about the entire value chain as it relates back to data, because this is one of the areas where we could actually shine.
I was actually going to just add to that, like, I saw something relatively recently, the typical thing is we think about privacy, security, data, data security. We think about someone has access, they're being given permission to access certain things. We deal with, we have a bunch of military customers, and this is a thing. But there's a flip side you can think about it is, instead of thinking about who has access to what, is like, where is this data allowed to go? think about it from the data first. And it's actually starting to find its way into computer systems where, hey, this data is allowed to go here and allowed to go there. And once it goes here, this person's now in an enclave. So I think that's a different way to think about it. I think the data sets are probably actually easier to identify and then start identifying where they're actually allowed by even maybe building it into the systems, building it into the data centers, building it into maybe even that middleware that Mark was speaking about. Maybe that is an opportunity for us, right? We think, okay, yeah, AWS spending millions of dollars to build this middleware of all the orchestration and stuff, but that's actually also where they're creating the vendor lock-in, right? You have all hosts of developers in the world who only know how to write cloud applications for AWS. Well, that's a problem in and of itself. And so if we start thinking the other way around and inverting the pyramid, maybe we have a better chance.
You've anticipated one of my questions here. How should we measure public trust and service outcomes in AI-enabled programs? Vince, do you want to start?
Yes, that again.
Okay, how should we measure public trust and service outcomes in AI-enabled programs?
That's a good one. So, I mean, obviously adoption rates, but I think the bigger thing is, actually, this is an issue I have, even just developing product day to day, which is, how do you actually measure success? How do you know a product is doing what it's intended to do? And one of the places that I think we can do a really interesting work, and you know, I always kind of get allergic reactions to things like policy, because policy requires compliance. But I'd rather by design. You know, we build test frameworks for things to prove that the product is doing what it does. I think what we should be thinking about is are there tests, ways, you know, think of them like programs we could run on our data, on our data sets, on our infrastructure as a whole in a country to prove that we're reliable, right? Like that's a lot of times what we have to do. You know, we get product certified for various security policies, common criteria, these sorts of things. We actually have to prove by like not just inspection, not just by, hey, yes, signing and checking boxes, but like literally prove that, yes, our randomized data is truly, truly random. We have to go through those things. I would love to see something where, I mean, that's to me where government can spend a lot of, and can spend a lot of interesting work saying, hey, instead of us trying to like write policy and legislation and things like, why don't we do this? Why don't we create incentives? And why don't we say, here's the thing that we're going to prove that what you said is true. And then we're going to show the world that we build these systems that are in fact provability, like with the proof that it's doing what we say. I think that'd be a really interesting area of research that we should get many levels, including academia, involved in. Because it's a problem open problem in software, and it's an open problem in reliable systems.
Erin, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I think just building on what Vince said, it's measurement, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the foodborne illness in Canada, we forecast that, and then it comes true. We get the cantaloupe off the shelves, and the deaths and the sicknesses go down. And so we're always, with our customers, we always ask our customers, before we start the project, what would success look like to you? What is it you're hoping to achieve? Now, sometimes our customers, it's funny, they want to hold that very close to their chest, right? Like, oh, I don't want to tell you what. No, but it's important for us to know that, because then when that's achieved, you'll know that you've achieved it. It's really, really important to us. We're a measurement company. So we forecast a measurement, or we look for a measurement. We have a module in our software called impact analysis, and we always measure the impact of things. And we say to the customer, don't tell us what your sales were. We're going to tell you. And they go, oh my God, and it's true. Now, to that point, I think our government also, I mentioned that we did this work for PHAC in Canada. They actually took the initiative to tell the CDC about our work, which I thought was fantastic. Usually, though, government doesn't do that. They like, oh no, we don't want to recommend you. We don't want to do anything like that. They did in this case because it was kind of life-saving work. But even when it's not life-saving work, I think if our companies are doing great work for the government should be a reference customer. You know, we should be singing our praises and talking about our companies and the great things they do, especially now. We don't have to worry about Kuzma anymore, apparently, so we can just like sing our own praises, and a government can praise our companies. And that, like Craig said, is worth a lot more than any grant money. I don't need your $20 billion. I'd love to have you as a reference, though. I'd love for you to say they did this and they were successful at it. And then we don't have the doom and gloom about AI all the time. That's the other thing, right? It drives me crazy. Every time I'm watching a Hollywood movie, the AI is evil and killing people. Hey, listen, AI saves lives. AI gets you on your Google Maps from A to B. Where would you be without AI? I mean, it's almost always for good. Yes, you can use anything for evil, but almost all the AI we're using today is benefiting people. So we need to start talking about that more.
Just a quick comment to take what's already been said by Vince and Erin. I think we're going to start to see a circle forming. I love your cantaloupe story, despite it being sad, because you didn't have to use the word AI to really get a strong symbol in one's mind about the value you provided in that case. And I think that we're going to see, when eventually this AI bubble wears off, or whatever you want to call it, we're going to see a resurgence of really intelligent outcomes. And what's going to be cool about that is anyone that's been in this business longer than 2 years is going to be able to circle back to all the great things you learned before AI was really an element of surprise. And that was, did the outcome meet or exceed the need? And I look at things inside our infrastructure that we deliver to the federal government or the provincial government, and oddly enough, there's a lot of AI hanging around in there already, and it still boils down to the outcomes. And did you improve something? Did you avoid something? Did you deliver economic value to the ultimate paying customer? That's always going to be strong.
What's the role of Canadian suppliers and R&D in strengthening resilience and competitiveness?
This is back to me. So I've said to anyone that'll listen to me, so thank you for listening, is that there's so much innovation capacity in Canada. We outweigh so many other markets around the world with our innovation, yet we have to continually take that innovation to other markets in order to be recognized. Part of it is there's a upside down risk reward issue in the public sector in Canada where people are afraid to take risks. There is the only thing better than having wild success is having wild failure quickly. And we could avoid a lot of embarrassment if we actually engaged with Canadian suppliers. The second part I'll make is I think it was Minister Solomon said this: we can't have AI in a vacuum. We have to work with the rest of the world. I totally buy into that. But I'll tell you a little story. Back in 2018, when we signed the framework agreement for cloud services as the only Canadian company, I had to wait months for Microsoft and AWS to negotiate an agreement with U.S. lawyers. I signed the framework agreement in 48 hours. Now, why on earth wouldn't a Canadian supplier be put at the front of the list to actually give us an economic advantage? Regardless of trade agreement, there's nothing stopping public sector in Canada from putting Canadian vendors at the front of a list. We're not talking about exclusivity or any favoritism other than why not put them first to give us a starting pole position from which we can actually perhaps have some earlier success instead of waiting for a delay tactic from U.S. lawyers.
Yeah, so you were asking about the role we can play?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, Craig, I like what you said, because believe me, we battle. Sarkis and I were talking about the same thing today. We battle that. It's harder to sell sometimes to Canadian customers than it is to the American customers, to European customers. I mean, it's frightening, in fact. That building across the space right over there sometimes is hard to sell into. It's the truth. And we are like, and it's not like we're, oh, nice little cozy story about some Canadian startup. No, we are like world class. Everywhere else, we are in the top venues, the top everything. And it's like, and yet I'm trying to go sell into a CFL stadium, and it's like I got to like prove that we're real, right? And it makes no sense. Makes no sense. So I think it's kind of like we have to band together in a lot of ways, like Canadian companies buying from other Canadian companies, not out of some charity or something, but like recognizing we have world class things here being built by Canadians here, right? Like, to not put you to the front of the list, to look at that, at least say, hey, is there a Canadian alternative? I can tell you there are other countries in the world that do this. There are products in our industry that never leave Japan, made by companies like Panasonic and Sony, that are just for the Japanese market. And you go to any one of the broadcasters there, it's filled with that stuff, and it never leaves the place, never leaves the country. And I'm not saying we get to that level of nationalism, but I mean, I think to at least put us at the top of the list and not like make us fight and crawl up to the top is crazy. It is just absolutely nuts. So I think, as a leadership position and then working with our wonderful Canadian university system and college system, we have, again, trained some of the best minds in the world. People come from all over the world to train at these same schools and to allow industry to like create a virtuous circle between industry, school, government, businesses together and to, again, put us at the top of the list because of that, I think would be massive.
Yeah, it's much easier to sell to Americans than to sell to Canadians. My first customers were American. Now, I say the best market in Canada is Quebec because they're like Americans. And I think it's because they get ignored a lot, because of the language. Je suis bilingue, alors je peux jaser en français comme tout le monde. So I use that to my advantage when I go into Quebec. But I'll give you a true story. My first sale was to an American. I had tried to sell in Canada first, and we didn't have customers. So the first thing they would ask me is 9 years ago, well, who else is using your software? Nobody. Oh, well, come to me when you've got like reference customers. Okay. So I go down to the US. Who else is using your software? Nobody. He's like, you mean I'm the first? Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Because they see right away. Yes, it gives them an advantage to be the first. You get a price advantage, you get a technology advantage, you get a first to market advantage. So that to me, and that's the difference between Americans and Canadians. Canadians are, who else is doing it? I don't want to be the first. Americans are, I absolutely want to be the first because it gives me an advantage.
I just want to add something. I read something recently that I found was very entertaining, also because I'm Italian. So Franca, you and I, the author wrote, if you're a startup and you go bankrupt in Italy, there's probably a criminal investigation, right? We're not too far off from that. In Silicon Valley, the day after, you're getting a phone call to start the next thing. And it's, yes, there's money in Silicon Valley. I get all that. But it's the mindset of like, okay, that didn't work. We proved one other thing that didn't work. Still good, smart people. Let's go to the next and to the next. Rinse and repeat. I saw there was an iterative approach. People talk about an iterative approach in the last panel. We have to adopt that in industry to say, that's okay. All right, one way it failed. Doesn't mean you're dummy. Doesn't mean, you're criminal. Means, okay, you found something that didn't quite work, but there's probably some good things you can take from there, some good people. Try again. And that's the spirit we need to really just, I think, excel in this country.
Could I add one more quick thing? Sorry. It's a real-world story. I was talking to someone from economic development in Ontario in the life sciences space. And I was saying to him, you're looking for ways to get money out into the system through grants and loans and things like that. The exact same time, the Ministry of Health, or Ontario Health, was issuing RFPs that made it impossible for an Ontario-based company to bid on something because they were so determined to have GE Medical. I shouldn't name people, but I'll just say it was clearly written for that. And what I found really interesting was, and I think this applies federally as well, the consumption departments, the people that spend the money, don't spend enough time talking to the department that wants to give out grant money to figure out how you double down on the spend. So it kind of links back to what I said earlier about spending versus grants. We talk about a budget problem in Ottawa. It actually, a lot of it could be solved just by looking at the way we are combining those spends or not combining those spends to drive economic advantage, which is going to drive payroll taxes, it's going to drive income tax, it's going to drive a whole bunch of other revenue sources at the country level in Canada, that if we just got ISED and the consumption departments talking, for example.
So how can departments balance cost versus performance versus security? Which tiered models or trade-offs make sense?
Oh, is that me?
Yeah.
This is so hard to say because I've never actually worked in government. Well, cost versus
Performance versus
performance.
security.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that depends on the project, right? Ideally, if you have a high-performing project, it's saving you cost. And that's something we always go into right away. And when it comes to security, well, here's the other thing. I told you we were on the list for ethical AI. We're level 3. We've had the tires kicked on us because we do and have done work for public health and for Health Canada, we had all of that. We were up at Parliament Hill and we had all the investigation. They looked at our architecture. Okay. So that's been done. And yet every time it's like we're starting from scratch. Well, we're worried that you're going to be collecting PII. Well, we don't do that. Oh, okay. You know, we have to go through this all over again for every single engagement. So it should be like if you're on the list for ethical and secure AI, how long does that last? I mean, does it like I have to go through this every time we're bidding on something? And then I think the costs and the delivery. I think we need more people who are doing procurement who understand AI, first off, because I do find a lot of them. There's a lot of misconceptions. They think everything's Gen AI, for example. They think everything's hallucination. They think everything is. When you're talking about public data, as I'm doing with me for market research, security is not really an issue. It's all public data. So there's none of this I'm not looking at people's private health data. I'm looking at things they've posted. And we only take publicly available data. So it really just depends on case by case. It doesn't, the cost and the performance are pretty evident, I think, with the stuff that we're doing.
Three quick comments. One is, I think we host 42 different departments on our infrastructure for some application. We've done 42 ATOs, which is crazy because it actually is only 3 applications. There should be 3 ATOs. So back to your point earlier about the constant review, there is a very interesting economic engine around the authority to operate and the security reviews. Because you always start from the position of being untrusted, regardless of how many times you've proven you're trusted, and despite your alignment to guardrails that are Canadian defined. One item. Second item is NIST. Does everyone know what NIST is? They're standards that the government of Canada tends to adopt very often. NIST actually rolls up to the Department of Commerce in the U.S. So if you think about how to influence economic advantage globally, that's what I would have done too if I was America. So here we are trying to adhere to standards that actually are not designed to make our lives easier. They're designed to make the competitors to American vendors harder. And the third thing I'll say is the supply chain integrity. So Vince's company and my company, we're starting to work on a collaboration. So we're going to throw out the foreign product and put in the Canadian product. We're doing the same thing on the compute side right now. And I think that if we all work together, we could have amazing supply chains that were incredibly powerful and so easy to understand versus the Byzantine world of bringing in technology from anywhere abroad. Forget the U.S. Anywhere abroad, you've got to deal with a opaqueness around your supply chain. It is the time for Canadian organizations and the public sector to collaborate on supply chains that ultimately can be exported. And that's really the real trick here is if we do it right domestically, this becomes an export engine as opposed to what it is today, where we export engine first, and then we try to somehow shoehorn it back into Canada.
Yeah, I'm going to just double on a couple of things you said. So yeah, AI, defining what AI is, everyone's, the word is, actually the field is about 60, 70 years old. It's been around since the beginning of computers pretty much. It was one of the first things they thought they could do with it, and artificial intelligence was coined back then. So I think everyone thinks ChatGPT, Gen AI, but actually those are the ones that are probably most likely in the bubble and most likely to be near the end. If you look into if you really look into it deeply. So whatever we talk about here, we have to think about what's beyond all this, what we're calling this Gen AI. But there are a lot of other workloads that can be highly performant if we're very clear about it. So back to your question, Paul, about performance. I think if we're clear about defining the problem, we can build performance, and incredible performance, almost sometimes industry-changing performance on some of this stuff. While everyone's trying to build all these huge inference things on these large LLMs, there's all sorts of areas of AI and other data workloads and automations that can be tremendously accelerated with specific technology applications. Some of the stuff Craig and our company are working on together, for example. And then what that does is that if you get tons and tons of performance, technology becomes a huge lever, which then automatically reduces price. So the more useful it becomes, the more more widely gets adopted. Therefore, it creates a virtuous cycle. Now, security is obviously antagonistic to some of those things because it eats into some of the performance often, right? And so that's a balance, and that does depend, going back to what was said before about what does need to be secure, and then what could be accelerated. And it's challenging. I mean, Craig, you know, in the data centers, you can say, oh, the network's secure, but yeah, then the workloads are sometimes in the clear inside the servers, and then are those servers shared? And there's a bunch of factors there, and it's really complicated. We could go on for a long, long time. So I think security is kind of separate from cost and performance, but if we can drive performance up enough that the applications we make are world-changing, then price will come down automatically, particularly for Canadians first. And I think that's a huge deal.
Okay. What minimum operational controls should be non-negotiable? Things like residency, encryption, incident response. Who wants to take that?
Honestly, I think right now we need to be flexible. I mean, this is early days. I mean, encryption, I mean, again, it's going to depend, right? Nothing that I do really needs to be encrypted, I don't think, as I'm working with publicly available data. To the extent, so for example, in the PHAC study, no, it was all, even the wastewater data that we were sucking up was all kind of, there's nothing secret about that. So I think you really need to understand all the stacks and all the layers and what you're doing, and ask yourself, first of all, do I need to be Fort Knox here, or whatever the Canadian equivalent of that is? And then if you do, you kind of have to the extent that we can bless something and say it's good, go on there. But I think right now it's very early days, and it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all for every project.
So something interesting happened earlier this week. It's been all over the media. Everyone knows about the AWS issue. Whatever. The outages happen all the time. What I found really interesting was how many Canadian entities were affected by a service provider that claims residency and sometimes actually tries to declare sovereignty, which is even more bizarre. But just think about the implication of not having clarity around your supply chain for a second. And when something as strange as a DNS error can occur in the northeastern U.S. and can actually take out Wealthsimple, one of our shining stars of domestic, progress, that to me is really concerning, because now we know we're dealing in an ecosystem where suppliers aren't necessarily being transparent or honest. So my answer to your question is, I think it starts with having clarity around the perimeter in which you operate. So, for instance, when we were awarded a contract slot, one of the things I committed to was federal workload does not cohabitate with Joe's Pizza Shop on a piece of infrastructure sitting in Quebec City. I could do that because to me it made economic sense. More importantly, I didn't want to get the call from the president of Shared Services 6 months later when we find out that something beyond the guardrails design resulted in something weird happening, like what just happened. So my answer is, you start with a hard perimeter, and if we're devoted and committed to sovereignty, well, the hard perimeter is the border. What occurs inside the border, as long as it can be controlled, managed, reported, and observed, then to me that fits into the control mechanics. Anything more ambiguous than that at this point in time, given how many moving parts and misrepresentations that are actually out there, that have been out there for years, to me is just a matter of time before something really bad happens. And when I say really bad, we can imagine, now does layer into that a little bit of uncertainty in some other entities globally, and things could get chaotic really fast.
Always comes down to DNS, doesn't it? Always. It's true. Look it up. That or BGP, one of the two. I think encryption or cryptography, I think a lot of this stuff is about, they are application specific, and I actually don't know if you can govern it or mandate it as much. I mean, I think that's very application specific. I mean, look, everyone's got how many different chat programs you got on your phone, just as an example. Let's just use that very practical example, right? Now, if you're Telegram, they talk about the chain of custody of the data. It's encrypted on your phone. Even an employee of that that entity couldn't even look at it if they wanted to, and if they had physical access to the server. Okay, that's interesting, but that's for messaging application. What happens when you do need to pull that data apart and it's sitting on a shared workload? And like, it's a very complicated topic, right? We learned WhatsApp is not actually really protected. In fact, it's just got the appearance of being protected because Facebook removed those protections, even though it used to be like. So there's a lot of things here, but they are application specific. I think what we can do though is, and this is some of the work that we're doing, we can provide better infrastructures that we have control over and can protect to put things in enclaves or protect workloads and putting them on dedicated servers and on dedicated segments of networks. There are ways that we could do that for critical services in this country and even change the way we approach things like networking and shared data. I mean, there are ways to do it. It's not just the way that it's been done. Remember, they've been built to scale to a certain degree globally and to also create vendor lock-in. Those are the two things that have really been built. AWS, Azure, GCP, those folks, it's the new operating system wars. It really, really is that I want that developer mindshare. So I think the big thing is going to be okay, is your data protected and secure, or is your user data protected secure for your particular application, not something we can really mandate from the top down because it just won't work.
One thing I want to sort of point out is then you have to look at the stack, right? There's one thing to talk about the server. Okay, the server's in Toronto. If worse comes to worse, we can lock it up. We can cut the internet connection so that the Americans can't take what's on that server, right? But there's also that whole tech stack that is decades of development and research. Let's look at something like LLMs. How many AI companies today are building on top of an LLM? We don't know how many, probably 80% of them. None of those LLMs are Canadian, I can guarantee you that. Okay, they mostly probably American. China has its own LLM. We don't have our own. So what if President Trump decides, you know what, those LLMs, that's just way too precious for us to share them with Canada. I'm yanking it. What happens to our AI industry? Boom, dominoes. Search, we don't have our own search. I use Elasticsearch. There's different search parameters there, but none of them are Canadian. And, you know, Etienne talked about, well, we can do open source, sure, but there's a huge expertise. Having the code is one thing, but you need the services, the people, like Elasticsearch is highly complex. IBM runs Elasticsearch, Oracle runs Elasticsearch. I don't know that there are any Canadians that do. We actually looked for Canadian providers, didn't find any. And you can't just sort of, you know how hard it is just to find AI talent to work in your company, never mind finding Canadian companies that are doing all this level in the stack. So, you know, again, Marc-Etienne said 22 billion is too much to invest. And then he also said just AWS alone is the entire investment of Canada. Well, that's just one provider. I mean, there's all the LLMs. How much money do you think went into that? All of search, how much money went into that? And we don't own any of it. So this is not something you're solving in 30 days, even after you get over the hosting.
You know what's sad? You talk about there was mention of like Geoffrey Hinton before. Geoffrey Hinton, U of T. The other co-winner, Joshua Bengio, University of Montreal. And Jan LeCun. None of them are American, and they've all made American companies very rich.
Yeah, we were the best at one point. We have the best academics. We're not great at the economics of it. And we've got to get a lot better at market innovation. We've got the technology innovation. What we don't have is marketing chutzpah, and we need to get that. Sales, we need to get chutzpah. That's what we need.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have. So thanks the panel for a lively session.